challenges in insulin therapy in primary care, and an update on new insulins. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I will take some precautions.
We will now speak about Dr. Sumanithileka.
Thank you, Randy. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Manilka Sumanithileka, MD, MRCP, Diabetic and Endocrinology, FRCP, FACG, SLCE, Consultant Endocrinologist, National Hospital of Sri Lanka. Dr. Manilka Sumanithileka is the immediate past president of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, the chairman of Sri Lanka Diabetic Federation, the vice president of the National Diabetic Association, and also the secretary of the South Asian Federation of Endocrine Societies. He has contributed a chapter in Cambridge University press textbook, and 5 his papers have been published in international journals. Dr. Manilka Sumanithileka is a fellow of Royal College of Physicians, the American College of Endocrinologists, and the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists. I warmly welcome Dr. Manilka Sumanithileka to deliver the lecture on challenges in insulin therapy in primary care and updates on newer insulin. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation, and for all our friends in the College of General Practitioners. Please excuse me for my rather shabby attire. I came only for this bit, I was expecting a committee room to be seated, and so I do apologize, and it's a very nice setting. I came to do the lecture in a small room. I thought it was a pure online. So let's start with the lecture. As you all know, we used to call, I made it a global emergency now because we used to call it a pandemic. Now these days we have to take a back seat where the non-communicable diseases have been temporarily taken a back foot because of the COVID emergency. But I think this is a time where we have meeting of 2 pandemics. The diabetes is going on, and the mortality and the morbidity of diabetes, as you can see, what's projected in our part of the world, 82% rise in the next couple of decades. In our region, already there are over 150 million diabetics, so it's an emergency for our region. And you look at the Colombo diabetes study and the prevalence in the cities, it's way above 20%. In fact, we got in Colombo 27%. That does not represent the whole country, but the data we have for the whole country still is the 2007 data, which is 10.3, but I think the numbers are much more. So it's a huge problem, and we need to treat this patient at the primary level. We just can't manage at the tertiary care level all these patients. So if you take the numbers, in 10 years' time, we might have like 4-5 million diabetic patients to be looked after in our country if the trend goes on the same. So basically the management of diabetes will be diet, exercise, all of you know that, oral medication, and the non-insulin injectables, which we have now once weekly preparations, GLP-1 receptor agonists, all that, and then insulin. So insulin still plays a pivotal role in managing diabetes, and we'll see what are the important things. We have enough medication, about 13 groups of other than insulin, newer drugs, as you all know, the SGLT2 inhibitors, and so many groups of new drugs are available, but insulin is still very, very important. What does the insulin do? If I may just summarize, it just acts as a key which enters the glucose in your bloodstream to the liver, fatty tissue, and muscle. It just facilitates the entry of glucose, and then it reduces the serum blood glucose levels. When the insulin is not working properly, if there is resistance or absolute reduction in the insulin number, then of course there will be decreased glucose uptake, increased gluconeogenesis, and increased ketone production. All this, the pathophysiology, will lead to the problems and the complications of hyperglycemia. From the UKPDS, we know, at the time, even in type 2 diabetes, at the time of diagnosis, 50% of your beta cell mass has been lost. So you are already partially insulinopenic, although there is insulin resistance as well. And if you don't control the disease well, and as the time goes by, you will lose the other half as well, the reserve. How soon that happens depends on how good your control is. The initial 5 years, if the HbA1cs are high and it's poorly controlled, you will go in for OHA failure early. Then you need insulin. The concept of glucose toxicity, you must remember, very high sugars can temporarily damage all these organs. Even microalbumin can appear for some time and they disappear when you treat the patient, especially with insulin. Retinal changes, beta cell damage, all that can happen early in the disease onset if the sugars are very high. How does hyperglycemia cause all these damages? I'm not going to take you through all these things, but it's the polyol pathway and the hexosamine pathway where you get glycated end products or advanced glycated products which changes all these factors, which ultimately results in increased platelet aggregation, monocyte recruitment, and smooth cell proliferation, as you know the pathophysiology behind atherosclerosis. So the patients become vasculopath. It may be in the form of micro or macrovascular complications. So we know the need to control the blood sugars, among other things. Treating diabetes is not only controlling blood sugar, but the other cardiovascular risk factors also should be reduced. But the different levels, the guidelines say how stringent you should control and whether you should go for insulin early or in the primary care setting. How do you categorize your patients, risk stratify? You can look at these attributes, and if they are younger, no complications, good quality of life expected, and motivated, you can go for very low sugars, fasting 80, HbA1c of 6, postprandial 140. If the person has multiple comorbidities, cancers, and life expectancy is 4-5 years, don't try heroics. Let the HbA1c be about 7.5 or even 8 is acceptable. Fasting of 120 and postprandial of 180 should prevent the problems associated with hyperglycemia. We are not looking at the long-term manifestations or the micro or the macrovascular complications in those patients. So you have to, so don't overtreat with insulin in those people. You have to choose your patients and be aggressive with the younger crowd. Guidelines with so many medications, they give all the options. So still you see the blue line around healthy eating and exercise is number one, lifestyle modification with whatever the modern medicines that we have. Next choice would be metformin unless there is a specific contraindication which you all know. And insulin could be second line, third line, or fourth line. Or ultimately, most patients will need insulin when everything else fails. Conservative management of, this is what we do in our clinics. You know, when somebody comes with HbA1c of 7, sometimes we are more relaxed. We say, try diet, exercise, come back in 3 months. HbA1c is 8.6. Then you add a usual Dianyl metformin combination. Then you go on for another few months, patient doesn't come back. Then go for 3 drugs, and then ultimately we are thinking about insulin, about way down the line, a few years gone. But the ADA recommendation is at least 7, but we should strive for 6.5 in younger people. So why is that bad? Or that's not the, even in primary care, you have to be more aggressive. Try to reach the given HbA1c that you have discussed with the patient, and you have given that patient according to those criteria you have decided. Anything from 6 to 8 you can decide. This is my target for this person for the next year. And try to achieve that within at least 6 months. Because of this, the metabolic memory or the legacy effect. So this came into play after the follow-up studies of UK-PDS and DCCT, that people who had good control in the initial 5 years, even if their blood sugar control is very poor, after the study was over, HbA1cs went above the control group also. In the study group, still they were the cardiovascular risk reduction was about 24%. People were wondering high sugars were there, still they were doing better than the control group who had poor control within the first 5 years. So that's how this metabolic memory and the legacy effect, we know it's all about endothelial damage. Once the damage is done, you become a vasculopath, and then you are prone for all the micro and macrovascular complications down the line. So that's the importance of being aggressive, and now what we recommend is to be very aggressive and try to achieve the target with 1, 2, 3, or one drug plus insulin if the sugar levels are very high, more than 300, and HbA1c more than 10. No point trying medication. Metformin plus insulin can be your choice even in primary care. So you should be more aggressive, and that's where the importance of insulin therapy comes. As you know, these two gentlemen, Banting and Best, discovered insulin in 1921, and how things have changed since then. People were type 1, children were dying of diabetes, and then this is the early child who recovered after their insulin therapy. And of course, I have told this, where insulin acts, mainly in the liver, muscle, and the adipose tissue, and how they reduce the the blood glucose levels. This is the normal physiology. We have a basal secretion, a small amount, even in the night. Why do we need insulin in the night? The gluconeogenesis from the liver. And in type 2 diabetes, that is altered because of the insulinopenic effect. There is increased glucose production in the liver due to altered gluconeogenesis. That's why people say, I didn't have my dinner even, my sugar is high in the morning. They are insulinopenic. They need a little bit of basal insulin at night. The sugars come down, right? And then the prandial rises with each meal, which is impaired in type 2 diabetes. It doesn't go up like that. So they have a postprandial rise of blood sugar as well. So the common indications for insulin, as you all know, the type 1 diabetes, diabetic ketoacidosis, and in type 2 hyposmolar state, gestational diabetes, we can give metformin now, plus next choice will be insulin. Then what is LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. It's a slow type 1, if you remember like that. Below 35 usually. Within a year of diagnosis, they will go in for OHA failure, and it's a very slow type 1 picture with GAD antibodies and C-peptide, all that. Antibodies positive with low C-peptide. And of course, intercurrent illness, perioperatively in type 2, you all know, and the OHA failure I was talking about. These are the common indications for insulin in our patients. Guidelines, certain guidelines, insulin come way down the line, and others recommend it higher up in the choice. So we need to take a clinical decision. It could be anything second line to third, fourth, or the ultimate therapy, depending on the situation. What are the key concepts? Now, if you want to start somebody on insulin, there is a basal requirement, which controls the hepatic glucose production, which I was talking about. Then we need a prandial insulin. So initial status, only the basal requirement is there. The prandial part can be managed by your sulfonylureas and the oral medication, the BIDS regime, bedtime insulin, daytime sulfonylureas or orals. Then when that is not working, sometimes you need a correction dose. So if you are giving insulin to cover the meal time as well, the soluble insulin, if that is post-meal is high, that particular meal needs a higher dose depending on the food that you are taking. So that is called carb counting, which we have to train our patients, but you can take a call and increase the doses. You can see how things have evolved over the years, from pork and beef insulins to the genetically DNA recombinant insulins, and now we have gone beyond and getting analogs. We are trying to do better than our own insulin and adding different chemicals and changing the characteristics. So we have produced insulins that work faster than your native insulin, and the insulins that work much longer than insulin. So we have got insulins working for 2 days, and the icodec now is 1 week is the norm we are trying. So early it was 24-hour insulins. We have the 18-hour, 16-hour, 8-hour soluble insulin. All these preparations are there. So it's simple. Insulins are usually there in hexamers. So by altering this, if you break it down, it will work faster. So our usual soluble insulin will be in hexamers. The newer insulin analogs like what we have, the NovoRapid, Humalog, or the Aspart, Lispro, all that will be dimers. So they breaks down faster and then acts faster. Then we have the FINASP, the fastest monomer insulin, which is not available in, it acts immediately. So it's all convenience, tailor-made. People can just inject and eat at the same time. Otherwise, you have to wait for 15 to 20 minutes for it to dissociate in your subcutaneous tissue and get absorbed. Then the other side, ultra-long-acting, you keep on adding zinc, protamine, different substances, and make the molecule larger so that it will break down slowly and it will work for 24 hours, 36 hours, now even up to 1 week. We are having experimental stages of this thing. So when you are using insulins, you should know the type that you are using. It's important to remember the basic pharmacology of the onset of action of that insulin, the peak action, and the duration. I'm not going to take you through all these numbers. It's available in any standard pharmacology textbook. You can go through this chart and be familiar with that. Why is that important? To choose the correct insulin for your patient's requirement. If the patient is getting hypos at a particular time and he's a teacher and then their meal times are different, then you know how to tailor-made that insulin. You should know that when you are giving a soluble insulin, the peak action will come in 3 to 4 hours. And then if that is not falling in a lunch, meal time area, then that person will get a hypo. And then they'll get the effect will wean off in 6 hours and then the sugars will go up. So you need to choose, if you know this, you can choose your insulin wisely to suit your patient and the lifestyle of the patient. In a graphic manner, it's the same thing that I am showing, the different types of insulin and their duration of action. What's the difference between analogs and our usual Isophane and Lente? They are much smoother. The analogs work without peakless. That's what they are trying to do. All other preparations, they have peaks and troughs. So that's where the problem comes. If a peak is not matching with a meal and the amount of food you take, you get hypos. And in the troughs, if they are having a meal, you'll get a poor control. That's the problem with insulin. That's where you get the ups and downs. So how do you escalate or start on insulin? As I said, you start with the BIDS regime, drugs plus basal insulin at night. If that is not working, basal plus 2 injections. Basal insulin plus the culprit meal, which is the lunch in most of the Sri Lankans, heavy carbohydrate diet. You give a small dose of soluble to cover that meal and basal insulin plus the orals. When that also doesn't work, you can go for 2 injections, pre-mix, morning and evening. That also doesn't work because of the lunch problem. We give pre-mix plus soluble insulin to cover the lunch time. When all that fails and then patients go in for OHA failure, when their body is not producing any insulin or low levels of insulin, basal bolus regime would be the answer. Short-acting insulins to cover each meal, and then we have the basal insulin for the basal need. So that's so what are the challenges in primary care? I looked at the evidence because this topic was new to me. So this is what they say: physician barriers, inertia, the patient barriers, the fear of needles, the thought of insulin. They say then, it's like a death sentence for some of the patients. They think it's the end of the road of their disease, giving insulin. So that's what you all can do a lot actually and make life much easier for us when they come, because they get a shock when they say, you have to take insulin, but all these years my doctor said you are having the non-insulin dependent type. Why? How come you are telling now? They'll never agree. They'll get a second opinion, and it takes a while for them to convince. So you all can prime the patients actually. Say eventually even type 2 will need insulin, and then of course if it is not controlled, better to go for insulin early than much later. So these are the system barriers, the logistics. You need a follow-up, avoiding hypos. How do you monitor? They need to have a glucometer. All that. We need a lot of support to put a patient on insulin, but I think the primary care physicians have a better rapport with the patients and approachability. So you all can actually start with the basal insulins and monitor the patients and then get help eventually from a specialized clinic. These are all the factors. I'm not going to go through, all interrelated. So the patient factors, the fear, then the dose adjustment problems, insulin care delivery, follow-up, and then the shared goals, all that. So ideally, there should be a nurse-led clinic and all that for a proper treatment of these patients. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can see the problems with patients. They have poor adherence to even oral therapy. These are the studies. Dawn study, if you want to read on this topic, because I wanted information, I read this recently. Dawn 1 and Dawn 2 studies you all can go through. This is all from that. Even tablets, they are 67% is not adherent. So imagine insulin, right? So their diet, you can see, exercise and feet, all that we are lacking, and they take shortcuts. Patients will say, yes, I'm exercising. I have my treadmill. They are hanging the clothes. And then, I'm walking my dog. Yeah, they are not lying to you also, but, people take shortcuts. Or go to the gym and 20 minutes of treadmill and have your burger and good fruit juice or in the juice bar. That's it. You are all lost, right? So that's what happens, the practical things. You all have to teach the patients. And somebody who is on a basal bolus regime, this is the scale of things. They have to spend time checking the bloods, and so they have to spend about 2 hours of their daily routine to, if you want to properly manage. So that is the problem. So we need to get the psychology of the patients also looked after. You can see how they are affected by the diabetes, especially on insulin. So these are the challenges we have. Looking to their well-being, reduce physical and mental health, which you all can do a lot. Finances, leisure activities, everything is affected, even relationship in the family, all that with the diabetes complication. Simple education, this study shows how hypoglycemias were reduced in type 1 patients by simple education, not changing the insulin dose or anything by these studies. So it's clearly evident the importance of education as well. Then there is weight increase, hypoglycemia, needle phobia. These are the worries among the patients when you are starting on insulin, and sometimes doctors also have that concern. Because of that, it's delayed. Complex insulin regimes. That's why I said go step by step. Start with basal, basal plus, and then escalate. Then patients also will get used to the insulins, and they'll be able to manage themselves better. Please don't put on somebody basal bolus regime straight away. That will be a disaster, and they will get hypos. You have to teach them about symptoms of hypoglycemia and avoiding hypoglycemia, all that. Adherence to insulin, 57%. They miss their doses despite knowing, this is in a developed country that done. So we know what this cartoon says. So we have to get our patients to educate them, and we have to get them to drink the water, more to say. And of course, sometimes the GP, especially the primary care physicians, will have to play to the tune of the patients, because you have to get them round, and understand their needs and the worries and all that, and perhaps not the best regime, but I have many times given those who really need twice-a-day insulin, just started with basal as an introduction, not perfectly controlled, but they get them round. So next visit they say, doctor, not control, no, we'll go for the 2 injections. So it happens. So don't push them, no, this is the regime for you and all that. So it's a fine art of tackling your patients when it comes to these things. So injections, hypoglycemia, weight gain, I have talked. So nowadays, with all this technology, if you all are into it, at the tap of a screen, you can do all this. Get the sugar to your clinic, and then give advice if there's a nurse or somebody to give advice. that can be done all centrally if you have the technologies. These days we have developed lots of apps and all that, and patients have their apps, and which gives the summary to the doctor, and then we can give the feedback. So think of these things in future for your patients on insulin. And of course, the glargine I was telling, it has shown clear benefit even with premix insulin. In the interest of time, I am skipping. Generally start with about 10 to 12 units, or 0.1 to 0.2 units per kg when you are starting. And if the sugar is not controlled, increase generally by 2. Maybe if the sugar levels are very high, by about 4 or 6. So this is the chart, but don't go up by 8 units, although they recommend. I would say 2 to 4. Increase by 2 to 4. Start with a long-acting insulin and increase by 2 to 4, looking at the fasting blood sugar. Then the prandial. If the postprandial sugars are more than 180, give about 4 to 6 units. Look at the values, set the target if it is 140, until you reach that. Increase the dose. Always, each step, reminding them about the diet. No point, otherwise they'll keep on increasing their diet also when they feel hungry, and you'll be never ending. It's become a vicious circle. So premix insulin twice a day, this is the pattern. So not the ideal, there are gaps in the treatment. So multi-dose insulin, if you happen to be in a hospital and initiate, please don't do this at home. Total daily requirement about 0.5 units per kg. How do you divide that? About 40% or half of that in basal form, other half divided into 3 for soluble insulin, and of course around 10 o'clock with a snack you can start the basal. So that's the way to start in a hospital. Correction dose, then you give that, and the postprandial sugars are high, you add a correction dose. Is a complex calculation if you want to do that, but generally increase by 2 to 4 units, it will be fine. So this is the basal bolus regime, which tries to match the normal physiology. This is with the normal DNA recombinant isophane and the soluble insulin. If you use all analogs, short-acting analogs and the long-acting analogs, that is the closest that we can get with multiple daily injections to the normal physiology. Otherwise, it has to be an insulin infusion. So I have only about 2-3 minutes. So the problems. Patients, they are having fasting hyperglycemia. You are increasing the dose, forever the sugar is going up. So one is that gluconeogenesis. What could be have you heard of the dawn and the phenomenon and the Somayogi effect? So think about that. In physiology, we were taught, I think, if you take the Gannon out, it will be there, right? So what happens, some people get nocturnal hypos when you increase the evening dose, and the body counter-regulatory hormones will increase the sugar in the morning. So you have to be very careful, ask for hypo symptoms at night, and do a 2 a.m. CBS if possible. And if that is low, actually reduce the evening dose, then the fasting blood sugar will come down, right? So that's the dawn and the Somayogi effect. Remember that. And self-monitoring is very important, and encourage them to invest in a glucometer. And studies have shown by just having a glucometer, you will improve their HbA1c without anything. Because when they measure, they know that it's high. Naturally, psychology is that you don't overeat or you be careful. Otherwise, they wouldn't know. And of course, record keeping, you all can do a lot to teach them. You know, they scribble things like that and come in a busy clinic. And so you can prepare a book like this, or a chart where they can document the sugar, so that we can get something out of it, the data. Regression of diabetes. Can we reverse diabetes? Yes, there are studies with insulin. Initial insulin infusions for 14 days. More than 50% of the patients can be reversed up to about 2-3 years in certain people. Even with diet and loss of weight, 15% of body weight in obese, we can reverse. The direct study, I just wanted to allude you because the importance of insulin. Early insulin, people, we can reverse diabetes for a reasonable period of time. Coming to newer insulins in 2 minutes now, I'm sorry, it's not the detail, just for you to know, there's insulin degludec, which is called Tresiba. which works for about 36 hours. So you have the flexibility. You can take it in the morning, next day you can take it at night. People who are traveling, overseas travel, all that, it's very useful. Then we have the Rhizodec, which is Degludec combined with Aspart. It's the newer version of Novomix or the Humalog mix, the Rhizodec. So this is all less hypoglycemia, more flexibility. People who are traveling, they can take it at any time. You don't get hypos, less hypos. Then we have the Glargine U300, concentrated insulin, smaller doses, you get a better effect than the normal glycine. Icodec is the one I was talking about, the once weekly insulin. We have not got a feel of it, it's still in studies. And then they changed the, I'm going to quickly go through this, I have finished my time. So this is Degludec, how they have put zinc and other molecules, and it breaks slowly and work for a longer period of time. This is the thing you can take at different times of the day, not at 10 o'clock in the night every day. You have the flexibility when you are changing time zones and all that. This is the Lantus. It is called Toujeo. The U300 Lantus is called Toujeo, which works better than the Lantus, less good, better control. We haven't got all those things. Now we are combining basal insulins with GLP-1 receptor agonists. Why is that? Good glycemic control, less hypoglycemia, weight. People lose weight while on this combination, and less complexity where Saltoffi, that is Degludec plus liraglutide. Victoza, we have it here. So you combine both. You lose weight plus better glycemic control and less hypoglycemia. So these are coming. It's very expensive, but at the moment we don't have. Soliqua is also same, Lantus plus lixisenatide. So these are all GLP-1 receptor agonists. And then we have the once weekly GLP-1 receptor agonists like Trulicity, semaglutide. These things will come, Ozempic in future. So with once weekly insulin and a once weekly GLP-1 receptor agonist, so I think we will have a better future, cost permitting for our patients, convenience-wise, less injections and better control in future. Thank you very much. There are online questions.
Yeah,
Oh.
online question from, I think, probably international participants.
Okay.
How do you stop or taper off the insulin? Can you mention the indication of stopping insulin?
Okay, so it depends on the indication that we have started. If it was a perioperative thing, so once the infection or the problem is solved or patient is ready for discharge, we would initially lower the, you could see if the CRP is coming down and lower the doses, and when the total insulin requirement is about 20 units, just offhand, could vary for different people, we could try, what I do is I introduce metformin if there is no contraindication, post-op, looking at the creatinine, all that, then introduce the orals while reducing by 2 to 4 units of each dose of the soluble insulin, and then when you are around, insulin requirement is around less than 20 units for a day, I stop that and put them on the full OHA regime, maybe 2 or 3 drugs. How do you decide on that? The previous HbA1c. On admission, we should do the HbA1c. If that is more than 8, I would continue on 8 or 9. I would continue on insulin if the patient is likes that. Otherwise, if the HbA1c is less than that, tail off and put them on, introduce the OHAs. So it just varies patient to patient on the scenario that you have started the insulin.
Any more questions?
Sky is the limit, of course, but the injections, if you're asking 60 units, is the conventional dose, the pens, right? 60. There are pens which can go up to 80. So that's where the U300 comes. So I have few patients with congenital insulin resistance syndromes where her insulin requirement is about 300 units for a day. Whatever it takes to overcome the resistance and get the sugars down without causing hypoglycemia. So sky is the limit, but practical issues will be there to, injections, all that, the maximum delivery. That's where the concentrated insulins. So somebody is needing more than 100 units, I would go for, if available, the U300. The 1 ml has 300 units. So it gives a smaller dose, less local reaction, and the sugar comes down. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Manika Sumatenika, for that interesting speech. I would call upon Dr. Timudu to award you our token of appreciation.